Old man sat alone at his birthday dinner. Then a biker heard why he canceled everything. You can cancel everything. Nobody is coming. The words left Walter Hayes' mouth so quietly the waiter almost missed them. But the calm behind them was the kind that comes only after a man has stopped expecting anything different. 8 chairs sat empty around him, 8 plates untouched, 8 glasses filled with water no one would drink. At 74 years old on the night of his birthday, Walter sat completely alone, and somewhere near the bar, a biker in a worn leather vest heard exactly what he said. Before we go further, if you're watching this, tell me what city you're watching from tonight, and stay with me until the very end, because this story is about to change the way you look at family forever. The restaurant smelled like garlic bread and candle wax, the same way it had smelled for the last 40 years. And Walter Hayes noticed that smell the second he stepped through the door, because it was the same smell that had greeted him and Evelyn on their very first anniversary dinner in this very building. Back then, the walls were painted a different color. Back then, the waiter who greeted them had dark hair instead of gray. But some things stayed the same. The corner booth, the soft yellow lighting, the way the whole place felt like it was holding its breath before something good happened. Tonight, it was holding its breath before something quiet and sad happened. Instead, "Table for 8, Mr. Hayes," the young waiter asked, checking his reservation sheet twice because he remembered Walter from last year and the year before that, and he remembered that every single time the old man reserved a table for 8, and every single time fewer than 8 people showed up. "Table for 8, Walter confirmed, nodding, adjusting the collar of his best shirt, the blue one Evelyn always said brought out his eyes. The waiter smiled and led him to the long table near the window, the one with the good view of the parking lot, the one Walter always requested because he liked to watch the headlights turn in, liked to see which car belonged to which child, which grandchild, which piece of his life was arriving to celebrate with him. He sat down at the head of the table. He straightened the napkin in front of him. He looked at his watch. 5:45 p.m. 15 minutes early, that was fine, that was normal. Emily always ran a few minutes behind because Seattle traffic was unpredictable and her flight schedule was tight. Daniel usually showed up right on time because he only lived an hour away, and he liked to be punctual, a trait he picked up from his mother. And his grandson, little Tommy. Well, Tommy wasn't so little anymore. He was 17 now. Tommy usually arrived with his father tagging along, already talking about basketball or video games or whatever 17-year-olds talked about these days. Walter smiled just thinking about it. He ordered a glass of water while he waited because he didn't want to start drinking anything stronger until everyone arrived. Evelyn used to tease him about that. "Walter Hayes, you're the only man I know who won't touch a drop of wine until the whole family's in the room." "That's because the celebration doesn't start until everyone's here," he used to tell her. "The celebration starts the moment you walk in that door." She'd correct him, squeezing his hand under the table. Everything else is just extra. He missed her voice more than he missed almost anything else. Not her face, though, he missed that too. Not her laugh, though, God. He missed that laugh so much it physically hurt some nights. It was her voice, steady, warm, certain, the voice that told him things would be okay even when they weren't, the voice that had gone silent 2 years ago and left a house so quiet that sometimes Walter would turn on the television just to hear another human voice in the room. 6 p.m. came. Walter checked his phone. No messages. That was fine. Emily was probably still at the airport. Daniel was probably fighting through the evening traffic on Route 9. These things happened. He ordered a small appetizer to nibble on calamari because it was Daniel's favorite, and he figured he'd order it before Daniel arrived so it would be ready when they all sat down together. 6:15 p.m., still no messages. Walter looked out the window at the parking lot. Cars came and went. None of them stopped at the spots he'd been watching. None of them belonged to his family. He told himself not to worry. He'd raised 2 children who had grown into busy, successful adults, and busy, successful adults ran late sometimes. That wasn't a crime. That wasn't a betrayal. That was just modern life, wasn't it? Everyone moving so fast these days, phones buzzing constantly, calendars packed tighter than a Thanksgiving turkey. 6:30 p.m. The waiter came by to refill his water glass and glanced just briefly at the 7 empty chairs. "Everything all right, Mr. Hayes?" "Just running a little late," Walter said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You know how it is, kids these days." The waiter nodded, though something about the way Walter said it, the slight crack in his voice barely noticeable, but there made the young man pause for half a second longer than necessary before walking away. Walter pulled out his phone and typed a message to Emily. "Hey, sweetheart, just wondering when you're expecting to land. Table's ready whenever you get here. No rush. Love you." He hit send and set the phone face up on the table the way he always did so he wouldn't miss the notification the second it came through. Minutes passed, no response. He told himself she was probably still in the air. Cell service on planes wasn't always reliable. That was reasonable. That made sense. 6:45 p.m. He sent a message to Daniel. "Hey, sun table's ready? Everything okay on the road?" No response. 7 p.m. The restaurant had filled up considerably by now. Families laughing in booze, couples holding hands over candlelight, a group of teenagers in the corner celebrating someone's graduation, their table loud with joy and photographs and cake. And Walter Hayes sat at his table for 8, watching 7 empty chairs, watching his phone screen stay dark, watching the parking lot fill and empty, and fill again without a single car belonging to anyone he loved. He felt something shift in his chest. Not anger. Not yet. Something closer to a slow sinking dread, the kind that settles in your stomach like a stone before your mind is even ready to admit what's happening. He picked up his phone and called Emily directly. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Emily Hayes Cooper. I'm probably in a meeting or on another call. Leave a message, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can." Walter didn't leave a message. He just stared at the phone for a long moment before setting it back down. He called Daniel next. 2 rings, then a click. "Dad!" Daniel's voice sounded strained, rushed like he was walking through a crowded space and trying to talk over noise. "Dad, hey, listen, I'm so sorry. Something came up with work. One of my biggest clients is having an emergency, and I've got to handle it tonight. I know it's your birthday. I feel terrible, but..." "It's all right, son," Walter said. And he meant it, or at least he told himself he meant it, because what else could he say? "No, it's not all right. This is the 3rd year in a row." That wasn't the kind of thing a father said to his grown son. That wasn't the kind of guilt he wanted to put on Daniel's shoulders. "Work comes first, family comes second, I understand." "That's not, Dad, that's not what I meant." "I know what you meant," Walter said gently. "Go handle your emergency. We'll celebrate another time. I'll make it up to you, I promise. Maybe next weekend, we'll do something special, just you and me and Tommy." "Sounds good, son." They hung up. Walter sat there for a moment, phone still warm in his hand, the calamari going cold in front of him. 7 chairs standing empty, like tombstones around a grave that hadn't been dug yet. He tried Emily one more time. This time it went straight to voicemail without ringing at all, which meant she'd turned her phone off, or it had deed, and Walter found himself hoping desperately, hoping that it was simply a dead battery and not something worse. Not forgetting. Please not forgetting, 7:15 p.m. The waiter returned this time with a look of genuine concern on his young face. "Mr. Hayes, would you like me to hold the reservation a little longer, or..." Walter looked at the 7 empty chairs one more time. He looked at the small birthday cake sitting on a nearby cart waiting to be wheeled out the moment his family arrived, the candles not yet lit. Something inside him, something old and tired and worn down by 2 years of exactly this same disappointment over and over, birthday after birthday, holiday after holiday, finally cracked. Not loudly, not with tears. Just a quiet, final kind of breaking the sound a man makes when he stops fighting. A truth he's known for a long time but refused to say out loud. "You can cancel everything," Walter said softly, looking down at his hands at the wedding ring he still wore, even though Evelyn had been gone 2 years, at the age spots and the calluses from a lifetime of fixing things for other people. "Nobody is coming." The waiter's face fell. "Sir, are you sure we can wait a little long?" "I'm sure," Walter said, and there was no anger in his voice, no bitterness, just a hollow kind of certainty that scared the young waiter more than any outburst could have. "Take the extra plates. Take the extra chairs if you need them for another table. There's no sense keeping it all set up for people who aren't coming." The waiter hesitated, glancing toward the kitchen, toward the manager's office, unsure what the protocol was for a moment like this, because nothing in his training had prepared him for the particular heartbreak of watching an old man give up on his own birthday. "Would you like me to bring you something else, sir?" "On the house, maybe." "Just the check when I'm ready," Walter said. "And maybe a coffee." The waiter nodded and walked away, and Walter sat alone at the head of a table built for 8, surrounded by 7 chairs that would remain empty, staring out the window at a parking lot where no car would ever arrive carrying the people he'd hoped to see. He thought about Evelyn. He thought about the letter she'd written him before she died, tucked away in his jacket pocket, even now worn soft at the folds from being read so many times. He thought about the promise he'd made her. He thought about how he'd broken that promise every single year since her death, quietly, secretly, in a way she would never know about because she wasn't here to know anything anymore. Never spend another birthday believing you are alone. He tried Evelyn. He tried so hard, he kept reserving the table for 8 because he really believed that this year would be different, that this year his children would remember what family meant the way she had taught them, the way she had modeled it every single day of their lives until the cancer took her from all of them. But sitting there watching the 7 chairs, watching his cold appetizer, watching the candles that would never be lit tonight, Walter finally allowed himself to think the thought he'd been avoiding for 2 years. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe love doesn't always come back, no matter how much of it you give away. The thought settled over him like a heavy coat, and for the first time since Evelyn's funeral, Walter Hayes felt truly, completely alone. Near the bar, close enough to have watched most of this unfold, but far enough to have stayed out of it, a man in a black leather vest sat with a half-finished beer in front of him. One boot resting on the rung of the bar stool, watching the old man with the 7 empty chairs, with an expression that had shifted slowly from casual curiosity to something much heavier. His name was Ray Carter, 50 years old, gray beard, trimmed neat and close, gray hair, slicked back beneath the do-rag he'd taken off when he walked inside, arms covered in ink that told the story of 30 years riding with the club. Everyone in 3 counties knew by name, the club whose patch he wore proudly across the back of his vest, the white background and red letters spelling out the words that made some people cross the street and made others, the ones who understood, nod with respect. Hell's Angles. Ray hadn't come to Miller's Steakhouse looking for anything except a good meal after a long ride down from the mountains. He'd planned to eat, pay his tab, and head back to the clubhouse before it got too late. He wasn't in the business of getting involved in strangers' business. That wasn't how he lived his life. Everyone had their own road to ride, their own troubles to carry, and Ray had learned a long time ago that most people didn't want a stranger poking around in their pain. But something about the old man at the long table had caught his attention the moment he walked in, and it wasn't just the 7 empty chairs, it was the way the man sat, spine straight, hands folded, patient, like someone who had trained himself through years of practice not to show the world how much something hurt. Ray had seen that posture before. He'd seen it in mirrors more times than he cared to admit. He watched the old man make phone calls that clearly didn't go the way he'd hoped. He watched the old man's shoulders sink just slightly with each conversation. He watched the waiter's face fall when the old man said something Ray couldn't quite hear from the bar, but didn't need to hear because the body language told the whole story. And then he heard it, just barely, carried across the room in a lull between the clatter of dishes and the murmur of other conversations. You can cancel everything. Nobody is coming. Ray set his beer down. Something about those words hit him harder than he expected. He'd heard sentences like that before. Not those exact words, but the same defeated shout of them from men in VIA hospital waiting rooms, from brothers in the club who'd lost people and stopped expecting anyone to notice, from his own father years ago in a nursing home that nobody visited nearly enough. People don't say things like that unless they've already given up on being disappointed. Ray sat there for another minute, turning his beer glass slowly on the bar top, wrestling with the same rule he'd lived by for 30 years. Everyone has their own road. You don't interfere unless someone truly needs you, against a growing feeling in his gut that told him this was exactly the kind of moment that rule was supposed to make room for. He glanced at the bartender, an older woman named Doreen who'd worked at Miller's for as long as Ray had been riding through this town. "Doreen," he said quietly, nodding toward Walter's T-bone. "You know that fella?" Doreen followed his gaze and sighed the kind of sigh that carried years of quiet, helpless observation behind it. "That's Walter Hayes," she said. "Comes in every year on his birthday. Reserves a table for 8. She shook her head slowly. "Lost his wife a couple years back. Sweetest woman you'd ever meet, Evelyn Hayes. Ever since she passed his kids." She trailed off, not wanting to finish the sentence, but the silence finished it for her. "They don't show," Ray said. "Not most years," Doreen confirmed. "Sometimes one of them does, never all of them. This year, she glanced back toward the table where Walter now sat with his head bowed, slightly staring at his folded hands. Doesn't look like anybody's coming this year. Ray felt something tighten in his chest. He come here often outside of birthdays. Every few weeks, Doreen said, always alone, always orders the same thing his wife used to order, sits in the same booth they always sat in if it's open. She wiped down the bar top with a rag, not really needing to just needing something to do with her hands. Breaks my heart every time if I'm honest. Ray looked back at Walter at the 7 empty chairs at the small birthday cake, sitting untouched and unlit on the cart near the kitchen door. He thought about his own father again. About the last few years of the old man's life spent in a room that smelled like antiseptic and loneliness. Waiting for visitors who came less and less often as the years wore on. Ray included, and Ray had never quite forgiven himself. For the visits, he didn't make the calls. He let go to voicemail because he was busy, because life got in the way, because he told himself there would always be more time. Until there wasn't. Ray stood up from the bar stool. Doreen glanced at him. You gonna say something to him? Don't know yet, Ray admitted, but I can't just sit here and watch it. He walked across the restaurant, past the tables of laughing families and celebrating teenagers, past the hostess stand, past the young waiter who was hovering near the kitchen door with an expression of helpless sympathy on his face, and he stopped at the edge of Walter's table, standing beside the empty chair closest to the old man. Walter looked up, startled out of whatever quiet grief he'd been sitting inside of, and found himself looking into the weathered, kind face of a stranger in a leather vest, a man built like he'd spent his whole life working with his hands and riding into wind, with eyes that carried more gentleness than his rough exterior suggested. Mind if I sit here? Ray asked. Walter blinked, caught completely off guard. In 2 years of birthday dinners at this restaurant, no stranger had ever approached his table. People generally avoided the old man, surrounded by empty chairs, either out of politeness or discomfort, or simple indifference. Nobody had ever walked over and asked to sit down. Walter looked around as if checking whether this was some kind of mistake, whether Ray had confused him for someone else. Sure, but I should warn you, it isn't much of a party. Ray pulled out the chair and sat down anyway, resting his forearms on the table, and something about the ease with which he did it. No pity in his expression, no performance of sympathy, just a simple, direct willingness to be present, made Walter feel for the first time all evening slightly less invisible. Looks like one to me, Ray said, gesturing at the untouched cake, the water glasses. The napkins folded into little triangles at each empty place setting. Walter let out a small surprised laugh, the first genuine sound of amusement he'd made all night. You've got a strange definition of a party, son. Maybe, Ray said, shrugging. Or maybe I've just been to enough sad ones to recognize when a table's got potential. Walter studied the man across from him for a long moment. The vest, the patches, the tattoos crawling up both forearms, the do-rag folded neatly on the table beside his beer glass. He'd read about men like this in the newspaper, sometimes usually not flattering stories, usually involving trouble of one kind or another. But there was nothing threatening in the way this man carried himself. If anything, there was something almost familiar about him, something that reminded Walter oddly of the men he'd worked alongside decades ago, on the railroad men who spoke little and meant everything they said. Ray Carter, the biker said, extending a hand across the table. Walter Hayes. Walter shook it, noting the strength in the man's grip, tempered carefully like someone who'd learned long ago how much pressure was too much for an old man's hand. Happy birthday, Walter. Walter's throat tightened unexpectedly at those 2 simple words, spoken plainly without pity, without the careful, cautious tone people used when they already knew a birthday had gone badly. Thank you, he managed, though I'm not sure there's much to celebrate tonight. Why's that? Walter hesitated. It wasn't a question he was used to answering honestly. Usually when people asked how he was doing, he gave them the easy answer, fine, just fine. Thanks for asking, because the truth felt too heavy to hand to someone who was really only asking to be polite. But there was something in Ray's expression that suggested he wasn't asking to be polite. He was asking because he actually wanted to know. My family was supposed to come tonight, Walter said slowly, testing the words, seeing how they felt out loud. My daughter, my son, my grandson, reserved a table for 8, actually, in case anyone brought their spouses or friends. He gestured weakly at the empty chairs surrounding them. Nobody came. Ray didn't say, I'm sorry to hear that, or that's terrible, or any of the automatic phrases people usually reach for. He just nodded slowly, absorbing the information, letting it sit in the air between them, without rushing to fill the silence with comfort that wouldn't really comfort anyone. That happened a lot, Ray finally asked. Walter looked down at his folded hands. More than I'd like to admit. How long's it been happening? Since my wife passed, Walter said, and saying it out loud, connecting those two facts directly for perhaps the first time, sent an unexpected wave of grief through his chest. 2 years now, Evelyn. She was the one who kept everyone together, I think. Kept everyone coming home for the holidays, kept everyone calling on birthdays. I always thought it was just, I don't know, I thought it was just family, the way families are supposed to be. But maybe it wasn't the family. Maybe it was her. Sounds like she was something special, Ray said quietly. She was everything, Walter said, and his voice cracked slightly on the last word. The waiter approached hesitantly, unsure whether to interrupt, but Ray waved him over with a friendly nod. 2 coffees if you don't mind, Ray said, and whatever this man wants to eat, on me. That's not necessary, Walter protested immediately. The old instinct of a man who had spent his whole life paying his own way, refusing help, taking care of others, instead of the reverse. Wasn't asking permission, Ray said with a small, easy smile. Just letting you know what's happening. Walter opened his mouth to argue further, then closed it. Something in Ray's calm certainty making further protest feel pointless. The waiter disappeared toward the kitchen, and for a moment the 2 men sat in a silence that didn't feel uncomfortable, just contemplative, the noise of the restaurant swirling pleasantly around them. Can I ask you something? Walter said eventually. Go ahead. Why'd you come over here, big place, like this, full of people? Man like you doesn't need to spend his evening listening to an old stranger complain about his family. Ray considered the question seriously before answering. Heard you tell the waiter to cancel everything, he said. Heard you say nobody was coming, and something about the way you said it. He paused, searching for the right words. It wasn't angry, wasn't even really sad, not the way most people sound when they're upset. It sounded like acceptance, like you'd already made peace with something that shouldn't ever have to be made peace with. Walter stared at him, startled by the accuracy of the observation. That's exactly what it was, actually. I've heard that particular kind of quiet before, Ray said. From guys in the club who lost brothers overseas and stopped expecting the phone to ring with good news. From my own daddy near the end of his life, when he stopped asking why nobody visited and just started assuming nobody would. Ray's jaw tightened slightly, an old grief passing briefly across his weathered features. I didn't visit him near enough before he passed. Told myself I'd make it up to him, never got the chance. Walter absorbed this, recognizing something of his own private ache reflected back at him from a stranger's face. I'm sorry, he said softly. Me too, Ray admitted. That's part of why I couldn't just sit at that bar and watch you go through something I recognized. Figured if I couldn't fix what happened with my own father, maybe I could at least sit with somebody else's. The coffee arrived along with a fresh plate of calamari, and Walter found himself, despite everything, actually eating, actually tasting the food, instead of just moving it around his plate out of obligation. Tell me about her, Ray said, settling back into his chair. Your wife, Evelyn. And so Walter did. He told Ray about the day he met Evelyn 47 years earlier at a county fair where she was working the pie booth, and he'd bought 3 slices of apple pie in a row just so he'd have an excuse to keep talking to her. He told Ray about their wedding, small and simple, held in her parents' backyard, because that was all they could afford, and how she told him afterward that it was the happiest day of her life, better than any big fancy wedding it could have been. He told Ray about raising Emily and Daniel, about the years working the railroad, to put food on the table, about Evelyn's insistence that no matter how tired they were, no matter how tight money got, birthdays always mattered, holidays always mattered, family dinners always mattered. She used to say birthdays weren't about the gifts. Walter said, his voice growing steadier the longer he talked, as if the simple act of remembering out loud was healing something that had been cracked for 2 years. She said they were about being together, about stopping just for one day and reminding everyone in the family that they mattered enough to gather around a table for. Sounds like she understood something a lot of people forget, Ray said. She did. Walter smiled, a real smile, this time warm with memory. She had this whole tradition. Every birthday, she'd make everyone go around the table and say one thing they loved about the person being celebrated. Didn't matter if you were turning 7 or 70, everybody had to say something. He laughed softly. Daniel used to hate it when he was a teenager. Thought it was corny, but he did it every year anyway because you didn't say no to Evelyn Hayes. What happened after she passed? Ray asked gently. Walter's smile faded slowly. I kept doing it, he said. The birthdays, the reservations, the 8 chairs in case people brought company. I thought I really believed that if I just kept showing up the way she taught us to show up for each other, everyone else would too. He shook his head slowly. First year after she died, everybody came. Grief does that, I think. Brings people together for a while. Second year, Emily missed it because of a work trip, but Daniel and Tommy came. And it was still nice, still felt like something. He paused, staring down at his coffee. This year, nobody came at all. Ray was quiet for a moment, letting the weight of that settle between them. Can I ask you something else? He said finally. Walter nodded. Why do you keep doing it? The reservations, the 8 chairs, all of it, if it just keeps disappointing you. Walter reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn envelope, its edges soft from handling the paper inside, creased along the same folds from being read and reread more times than Walter could count. Before Evelyn passed, he said quietly, she wrote letters, one for each of the big moments she knew she wouldn't be there for. My birthdays, our anniversary, Emily's wedding whenever that finally happens. She wanted me to have her voice in the room even after she was gone. He unfolded the letter carefully, his hands trembling slightly, though whether from age or emotion it was hard to tell. This is the one she wrote for my birthdays. I read it every year before I come here. What's it say? Ray asked softly. Walter's eyes moved over the familiar handwriting, and he read the line that had guided every birthday decision he'd made for 2 years, the promise that had shaped his hope and increasingly his heartbreak. Never spend another birthday believing you are alone, my love. Family always comes back to the table. Always. Trust that even when it's hard. Walter folded the letter back up slowly and returned it to his jacket pocket, his hand lingering there for a moment as if drawing comfort from its presence. I've spent 2 years trying to prove her right, he admitted. Every birthday, every reservation, every 8 chairs, hoping this would be the year everyone remembered what she taught us. He looked up at Ray, and for the first time that evening, real tears gathered in his eyes, though he blinked them back with the practiced discipline of a man who had learned long ago not to let himself fall apart in public. Tonight, I think I finally accepted that maybe she was wrong. Maybe love doesn't always come back to the table no matter how much you gave it away for 45 years. The restaurant seemed to grow quieter around them, though of course it hadn't the same clatter of dishes and murmur of conversation continuing exactly as it had before. But for Ray, in that moment, the only thing that existed was the old man across the table and the raw, unbearable honesty of what he'd just confessed. Ray leaned forward, his forearms resting on the table, his eyes locked steadily on Walter's. No, he said firmly. Walter blinked, confused. No, what? No, she wasn't wrong, Ray said, his voice carrying a certainty that surprised even himself. Family doesn't always mean blood, Walter. Sometimes the people who are supposed to show up don't. That's on them, not on you, and it sure as hell isn't proof that your wife was wrong about anything. He glanced around at the 7 empty chairs surrounding them, and something in his expression shifted. Hardened slightly, the way a man's expression hardens right before he decides to do something he can't take back. But that doesn't mean this table has to stay empty tonight. What are you talking about? Walter asked, a flicker of confusion and cautious hope crossing his weathered face. Ray didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into the pocket of his leather vest and pulled out his phone, his thumb already moving across the screen, with the practiced ease of a man dialing a number he knew by heart. Ray, what are you doing? Walter asked again, watching with growing bewilderment as the biker raised the phone to his ear. Ray held up a finger, asking for patience, and then the call connected. Yeah, it's me, Ray said into the phone, his voice carrying a new authority that hadn't been there during his quiet conversation with Walter. I'm at Miller's Steakhouse off Route 12. A pause during which Walter could faintly hear a voice on the other end responding. I need everyone, Ray said, and I mean everyone who can get here in the next 30 minutes. Walter's eyes widened. Ray, you don't have to. Ray held up at his hand again, still listening to the voice on the phone. It's somebody's birthday, Ray said simply, and nobody showed up for him. Walter felt his chest tighten with a confusing mixture of embarrassment and disbelief. Please, you really don't need to do this. I don't want to be any trouble. I'm sure everyone has their own. Ray covered the phone's microphone with his palm for a moment and looked directly at Walter, his expression softer now, but no less determined. Maybe I don't have to, he said quietly, but somebody should. And since I'm the one sitting here, I guess that somebody's me. He returned his attention to the phone. 30 minutes, Miller's Steakhouse. Spread the word. He listened for another moment, then nodded. Yeah, bring Al. Bring everybody you can find. He ended the call and set the phone down on the table, meeting Walter's stunned expression with a calm, steady gaze. Ray, Walter said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. What did you just do? Made a phone call. Ray said simply, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. To who? My family, Ray said, the kind that shows up. Walter opened his mouth to say something else, some further protest, some attempt to talk this kind stranger out of whatever he had just set into motion. But before he could find the words, he noticed something happening outside beyond the restaurant windows, something that made every other conversation in the building slowly begin to falter and fade. A low rumble, distant at first like thunder gathering somewhere over the mountains, then closer, then unmistakable. The restaurant's front windows began to rattle faintly with the growing vibration of engines, dozens of them approaching from somewhere down Route 12, and every single person inside Miller's Steakhouse, the celebrating teenagers, the couples holding hands, the waiters weaving between tables, and one old man who had spent his birthday believing nobody was coming, turned toward the parking lot with wide, uncertain eyes, watching as headlight after headlight began to appear in the darkness outside, closer and closer and closer still. Walter's hands began to tremble against the table, not from fear, but from something he hadn't felt in longer than he could remember. The overwhelming, disorienting sensation of being about to witness something he never could have imagined on a night he had already resigned himself to spending completely and utterly alone. The engines grew louder with every second until the windows of Miller's Steakhouse trembled faintly in their frames and every conversation in the restaurant died down to nothing, replaced by the low rolling thunder of motorcycles pulling into the parking lot one after another, headlights sweeping across the glass like search beams. Walter's hands gripped the edge of the table. Ray, Tio, he said, his voice barely holding steady. How many people did you call? Didn't put a number on it, Ray said, watching the parking lot fill with a calm that Walter found almost unsettling. Just said it was somebody's birthday and nobody showed up for him. Word travels fast when it's something that matters. This is too much, Walter whispered. I didn't ask for this. No, Ray agreed. You didn't ask for any of it, that's kind of the point. The restaurant door swung open and the first man walked in. He was enormous, well over 6 feet, with a chest like a barrel and forearms thick with faded ink, a gray-streaked beard hanging halfway down his chest, and a leather vest that matched Ray's, the same patch stitched across the back. He scanned the room, once found Ray's table immediately, and crossed the floor with the easy confidence of a man who had never once in his life worried about whether he belonged somewhere. Big Al, Ray said, standing to clasp the man's hand. Heard somebody was trying to have a birthday all by himself. Big Al said, his voice a deep rumble that carried across half the restaurant. He turned his attention to Walter, and his whole face softened, the toughness melting into something almost tender. That's you, old-timer. Walter, still too stunned to fully process what was happening, managed a small nod. Well, that's not happening anymore, Big Al said simply, and he pulled out the chair directly across from Walter and sat down like he'd been invited weeks in advance. Behind him, more riders filed through the door. A woman with silver hair pulled back in a tight braid, patches covering her vest, just like the men's walked in, laughing at something someone behind her had said. A younger man, maybe 30, with a beard still growing in and eyes that hadn't yet lost their eagerness, trailed close behind her, then 2 more, then 3 more after that. Within minutes, the quiet corner of Miller's Steakhouse that had held 1 old man and 7 empty chairs became something else entirely. A crowded, noisy, laughing gathering of leather-clad strangers who somehow within seconds of walking through the door no longer felt like strangers at all. Ray, Walter said, watching in disbelief as chair after chair filled around him as the restaurant staff scrambled to pull extra tables together to accommodate the growing crowd. I don't even know most of these people. Give it an hour, Ray said, grinning. You will. The silver-haired woman leaned across the table and extended her hand toward Walter. Name's Donna, she said. Ray called and said there was a man here who deserved better than an empty table on his birthday, so here I am. Walter Hayes, Walter said, shaking her hand, still half convinced this was some kind of dream he'd wake up from any moment. Well, Walter Hayes, Donna said, settling into her chair, what do you like to eat? Because from what I hear, you haven't had a proper meal put in front of you all night. Before Walter could answer, the young waiter reappeared at the edge of the growing crowd, looking simultaneously overwhelmed and strangely delighted, a fresh notepad in hand. Sir, he said, it's Walter, should I bring out the birthday cake now or base? Not yet, Big Al interrupted, holding up a hand. Man's got to eat a real meal first. Cake comes after. That's just good manners. The waiter blinked clearly, unused to taking direction from anyone but management, but something about Big Al's tone left no room for argument, and he nodded quickly before hurrying off toward the kitchen. More riders continued arriving, even as the first group settled in until Walter counted. Though he quickly lost track, at least 15, maybe 20 people crowded around tables that had been pushed together to form one long stretch of celebration, filling every one of those 7 empty chairs, and then requiring a dozen more borrowed from other parts of the restaurant. The other diners at Miller's Steakhouse had stopped pretending not to watch. Families in nearby booths whispered to each other, craning their necks to catch glimpses of what was unfolding. A few of the teenagers from the graduation party, a few tables over, had actually stood up and walked closer, phones raised recording the scene with wide-eyed fascination. Walter noticed this and felt a flush of embarrassment. Ray, he murmured, leaning close. People are staring. Let them stare, Ray said easily. Nothing wrong with people seeing what it looks like when somebody refuses to let an old man spend his birthday alone. Big Al overheard and nodded firmly. Damn right, he said loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. This is what family looks like, folks. Might not share blood, might not share a last name, but that don't make it any less real. Walter felt his throat tighten again. The same overwhelming lump he'd fought back earlier in the evening, except this time it came from something entirely different than grief. The food began arriving in waves, plates of steak and mashed potatoes, baskets of bread, more calamari, because apparently word had spread that it was Walter's favorite glasses of wine and beer and soda passed hand to hand down the long table. Conversation rose and fell like music stories, overlapping laughter, breaking out every few seconds from one corner of the table or another. Donna leaned toward Walter as he finally began eating a proper meal, watching him with genuine curiosity. So tell me, Walter, 45 years married, Ray says. That's not nothing these days. What's your secret? Walter set down his fork, considering the question seriously, the way he considered most questions about Evelyn, because talking about her felt like handling something precious and fragile. Evelyn used to say the secret wasn't some big grand thing, he said slowly. She said the secret was choosing each other again every single day, even on the days you didn't feel much like choosing. Especially those days, actually. Donna smiled softly. Smart woman. She was, Walter said. Smarter than me by a mile. She's still with us, the young rider with the eager eyes asked from further down the table before Big Al shot him a sharp look, and he immediately backpedaled. Sorry, I didn't mean... It's all right, Walter said, gently waving off the young man's embarrassment. She passed 2 years ago. Cancer. Fought it hard for almost a year, but... He trailed off, shrugging slightly, the gesture carrying more grief than words could have. The table quieted for a moment, the noisy celebration briefly hushed by genuine respect. I'm sorry, man, the young rider said, his eagerness replaced by sincere sympathy. Right, sure you think. That's rough. Thank you, son, Walter said. It was rough, still is some days. Big Al cleared his throat. You mind if I ask something, Walter? And you don't gotta answer if it's too personal. Go ahead. Ray said your family didn't show up tonight. Your own kids. Big Al's expression carried none of judgment, only genuine confusion. The kind of confusion that came from a man who couldn't fathom such a thing happening in his own world. How's a man raise 2 kids for that long and they don't show up for something like this? Walter felt the question land heavily. The same question he had been asking himself for 2 years without ever finding an answer that didn't hurt. I don't know, he admitted quietly. I keep asking myself the same thing. I raised them right, or at least I thought I did. Evelyn and I gave them everything we had. Never missed a birthday, never missed a school play, never missed a single moment we could help it. And somewhere along the way, he shook his head slowly. Somewhere along the way, they just got busy, got caught up in their own lives. And I understand that life moves fast for young people. careers, and families of their own to worry about. But I guess I always believed that no matter how busy things got, they'd always make room for this, for one dinner once a year. They know how tonight went, Donna asked. Do they know nobody showed a man? My son knows, Walter said. I talked to him on the phone. Work emergency, he said. My daughter, Walter glanced at his phone sitting silent on the table. I haven't heard from her at all. Ray watched Walter's face carefully as he said this, noting the particular flicker of pain that crossed the old man's features when he mentioned his daughter's silence, a pain distinct from the general sadness of the evening, something more specific, more personal. You two close, Ray asked. You and your daughter. We used to be, Walter said. Before Evelyn passed, Emily called every Sunday. Every single Sunday, like clockwork, for 15 years. After her mother died, the calls got less frequent, then further apart. Now, he shrugged again, that same helpless, worn-down gesture. Now I'm lucky if I hear from her once a month. You ever ask her why? Big Al pressed gently. I tried once, Walter admitted, about 6 months ago. Asked her straight out if something was wrong between us, if I'd done something to upset her. She said no, said everything was fine, said work was just crazy busy, and she was sorry she hadn't called as much. He paused. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. Something in the way Walter said this last part made Ray lean forward slightly. But you don't believe her anymore. Walter was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his half-eaten meal. I think, he said slowly, that some people don't know how to be around grief, even their own father's grief. I think being around me, seeing how much I still miss her mother, seeing the empty half of the bed, I still can't bring myself to change the sheets on. I think it reminds Emily of everything she's trying not to feel. And maybe it's easier for her to just stay away. The table had grown quiet again, everyone listening now, the earlier boisterous energy replaced by something more solemn and attentive. That's not fair to you, though, the young writer said, his earlier nervousness giving way to something more indignant on Walter's behalf. Doesn't matter how hard grief is for her. You lost your wife. She lost her mom. Seems like you two ought to be leaning on each other, not avoiding each other. That's what Evelyn would have said, too. Walter said, a small, sad smile touching his lips. She always said grief shared gets lighter. Grief hidden gets heavier. Smart woman, Donna repeated softly. The waiter reappeared, then hovering near the edge of the table with visible hesitation. Excuse me, Mr. Hayes, he glanced nervously at the crowd of bikers surrounding Walter. There's a woman on the restaurant phone, says she's your daughter, says she's been trying to reach your cell, but it's not going through. Walter's whole body went rigid. He looked down at his phone, confused, then realized it had died at some point during the chaos of the evening without him noticing. Emily, he breathed. You want to take it? The waiter asked. Every single person at the long table fell completely silent, watching Walter with an intensity that made the old man's hands begin to shake. Yes, Walter said. Yes, of course. He stood and Big Al reached out to steady his arm briefly, an unspoken gesture of support before Walter followed the waiter toward the front of the restaurant where a cordless phone waited near the hostess stand. Ray watched him go, his jaw tight, a protective instinct rising in his chest that surprised him with its intensity, given he'd known this old man for less than 2 hours. You think she's calling to apologize? The young rider asked quietly. Don't know, Ray said. Hope so. At the hostess stand, Walter picked up the phone with trembling hands. Emily. Dad. Emily's voice came through the receiver, breathless, panicked, layered with static that suggested she was somewhere loud, somewhere with wind or traffic noise in the background. Dad, oh my God, I've been trying to call you for the last hour. Your phone keeps going straight to voicemail. I was starting to panic. My phone died, Walter said. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I didn't realize. Dad, listen. I am so sorry. I am so sorry. Emily said, her words tumbling out, rapid and desperate. My flight got delayed, then it got delayed again, then they canceled it entirely because of weather in Denver. I've been stuck at the airport for 6 hours trying to find another way to get there. I even looked into renting a car, but it's a 14-hour drive and there's no way I'd make it in time. I feel absolutely terrible, Dad. I promise you I was coming. I would never just not show up. Emily? Walter interrupted gently, though his heart had already begun to ease at the genuine distress in his daughter's voice, distress that sounded nothing like an excuse and everything like real heartbreak. It's okay. It's not okay, Emily said, and Walter could hear that she was crying now, the sound catching in her throat. It's your birthday, Dad. The first birthday I've ever missed completely, not even a phone call, and I know you probably think I forgot about you, or that I don't care, but that's not it at all. I swear to you. Emily, sweetheart, breathe, Walter said, and found himself, even in this moment, falling back into the familiar role of comforting his daughter rather than the other way around. I believe you. Weather happens. Flights get canceled. This isn't your fault. But you were alone, Emily said, her voice breaking further. You were sitting there all alone on your birthday because of me, and Daniel told me he couldn't make it either because of some work thing, and I just keep imagining you sitting there by yourself, and it's breaking my heart, Dad. Walter glanced back over his shoulder at the long table crowded with leather-clad strangers who had in the span of a single evening transformed themselves into something resembling family, all of them watching him with quiet concern from across the restaurant. Actually, Walter said slowly, a small smile beginning to form, I wasn't alone for very long. What do you mean? What? Walter told her. He told her about Ray, about the phone call, about the motorcycles arriving in the parking lot like something out of a dream, about Big Al and Donna and the young rider whose name he still hadn't learned, about the table full of strangers who had chosen without hesitation to make an old man's birthday matter. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Dad! Emily finally said, her voice thick with a complicated mixture of relief and shame. I don't even know what to say. Strangers did that for you, just because they heard you were alone. Not strangers anymore, Walter said, watching Ray raise a hand in a small wave from across the room. Family, I think, or something close to it. I'm so glad you're not alone, Emily said quietly. But Dad, I still feel awful. I should have been there. I should have found some way to be there. You tried, Walter said. Sometimes that has to be enough. It's not enough, Emily said, and something in her voice shifted, hardened slightly, with a resolve Walter hadn't heard from his daughter in longer than he could remember. I'm going to make this right, Dad. I don't know how yet, but I am. I promise you that. They talked for a few more minutes, Emily asking questions about the bikers, about the birthday cake, about whether Walter was eating enough, whether he was warm enough, all the small, anxious questions of a daughter trying to make up for absence with attention. When they finally said their goodbyes, Walter returned to the table feeling lighter than he had all evening, though a small, persistent ache remained beneath the relief. Everything all right? Ray asked as Walter settled back into his seat. Her flight got canceled, Walter said. Weather in Denver. She's been trying to reach me for an hour, feeling terrible about it. See, Big Al said, pointing his fork at Walter for emphasis. Sometimes there really is a good reason. Don't mean the hurt of it goes away, but it's different than somebody just not caring. I suppose that's true, Walter said, though something in his expression suggested the reassurance only went so far. Ray noticed the lingering shadow behind Walter's eyes and leaned in. But Walter hesitated. But this isn't the first time, he admitted quietly. There's always a reason. Work emergency, canceled flight, sick kid 1 year. Every single time a perfectly good, perfectly understandable reason. He looked down at his hands. I believe every single one of those reasons, Ray. I really do. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being able to ignore the pattern underneath all those reasons. What pattern's that? Donna asked gently. That I've become something people mean to get to. Walter said, his voice barely above a whisper, now the words clearly costing him something to say out loud. Something on the list, but never quite at the top of it. Emily loves me, I know she does. Daniel too. But loving someone and prioritizing someone aren't always the same thing, and I think somewhere in the last 2 years, I stopped being a priority for either one of them. The table had gone quiet again, the weight of Walter's honesty settling heavily over the celebration. Big Al set down his fork. That's a hard thing to carry, old-timer, he said. But I'll tell you something. Whatever your kids got going on, whatever's keeping them from putting you first, that's their burden to fix, not yours to just accept. You didn't do anything wrong by wanting your family at your birthday table. That's about the most reasonable thing a man could want. He's right, Ray added. Wanting to be a priority to your own children isn't asking too much, Walter. It's asking for something basic. Something you earned 100 times over raising them. Walter felt tears threatening again, and this time he let a few slip past his careful discipline, wiping them quickly with the back of his hand. I'm sorry, he murmured. I don't usually fall apart like this in front of people. Nothing to apologize for, Donna said, reaching over to squeeze his hand briefly. This table's a safe place tonight. Fall apart all you need to. The young rider, whose name Walter finally learned was Tucker, cleared his throat and raised his glass. Can I say something? Go ahead, kid, Big Al said. I never met my own grandfather. Tucker said, his voice a little unsteady, clearly unused to speaking in front of the group. He died before I was born, and I think about that sometimes, wonder what it would have been like to have somebody like that in my life. He looked at Walter with an earnestness that made the old man's chest tighten. I know I'm not your grandson, Walter. I know this isn't the same as your real family being here. But if it's all right with you, I'd like to consider tonight the start of something, if you'll have me. Walter stared at the young man, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his voice, and found himself nodding before he'd even fully processed the offer. I'd like that very much, Tucker. The table erupted into a round of applause and raised glasses, the earlier heaviness lifting slightly under the warmth of the moment, and Walter found himself for the second time that night laughing a real laugh, unguarded and full, the kind he'd genuinely forgotten he was still capable of. It was in the middle of this laughter, glasses clinking, Big Al telling some outrageous story about a cross-country ride that had gone hilariously wrong somewhere in New Mexico, that Walter's phone buzzed against the table. It had apparently charged just enough from being plugged into a portable charger Donna had produced from her jacket pocket without anyone quite noticing when. Walter glanced down and saw Daniel's name on the screen. Excuse me, he said, standing to take the call somewhere quieter. Dad, Daniel's voice sounded strange, tighter than it had during their earlier conversation. Dad, what's going on? Emily just called me, said something about bikers at the restaurant. That's right, Walter said, walking toward the restaurant's entrance for privacy. A whole group of them showed up, made sure I wasn't spending my birthday alone. Bikers, Daniel repeated, his tone carrying an edge Walter didn't immediately recognize. Dad, what kind of bikers? Are you safe? Did they? Daniel! Walter interrupted, a flash of something close to irritation rising in his chest for the first time all evening. They didn't do anything except sit down and celebrate with me. Fed me a proper meal, made me laugh more than I have in months. I don't know what you're imagining, but it isn't that. Daniel paused, seeming to catch himself. I'm sorry, Dad, I just worry. You hear stories about motorcycle clubs, and I don't know these people, and you're by yourself out there. I wasn't by myself, Walter said, his voice firmer now than it had been all night. That's the whole point, son. I was alone because my own family didn't show up. These strangers made sure I wasn't. Maybe instead of worrying about who's sitting at my table, you should be thinking about why that chair was empty in the first place. There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line. That's fair, Daniel finally said quietly. That's completely fair, Dad. I'm sorry, I really am. I know I've missed too many of these lately, and I know saying sorry doesn't fix it. No, Walter agreed, it doesn't. I want to make it up to you, Daniel said. Can I come by this weekend? Bring Tommy, we'll do something, just the three of us. I'd like that, Walter said, feeling the earlier flash of anger softening into something more tired, more resigned, but still hopeful. I really would. They talked for a few more minutes before hanging up, and Walter stood near the restaurant entrance for a moment, gathering himself, processing the strange whiplash of emotions the evening had put him through. Abandonment, then unexpected warmth, then guilt. Laden apologies from the very people who'd caused the abandonment in the first place. When he returned to the table, Ray studied his face carefully. Everything okay? Daniel, Walter said, sitting back down. Feeling guilty, wants to come by this weekend. You believe him? Ray asked. Walter considered the question honestly. I want to, he said. I suppose we'll see. Big Al leaned forward, his expression suddenly serious. Walter, I don't mean to overstep, but can I say something as somebody who's watched a lot of families fall apart and come back together over the years? Please. Words are cheap, Big Al said. Everybody's good at saying sorry, saying they'll do better, saying this weekend will be different. What matters is whether they actually show up. Not this weekend, not next month. Consistently. Over and over, even when it's inconvenient, even when work gets busy, even when life throws something in the way. He gestured around the table at the gathered riders. That's the difference between the family you're born into and the family you build. The ones you build, they show up because they choose to every single time, not because blood obligates them to. Walter absorbed this feeling. The truth of it settled into his chest alongside the cautious hope Daniel's apology had stirred. "I hope my children choose to," he said quietly. "I really do." "And if they don't," Donna said gently, "you've got a table full of people tonight who already have." The conversation shifted after that lightning again, as more stories were shared, as the young waiter finally wheeled out the birthday cake to a chorus of enthusiastic and slightly off-key singing from 24 leather-clad bikers, drawing amused and delighted attention from every other table in the restaurant. Walter closed his eyes to make his wish, the flickering candlelight warm against his face, surrounded by more genuine warmth than he'd felt in 2 long, lonely years. He didn't tell anyone what he wished for, but as he opened his eyes and looked around at the faces surrounding him, Ray's steady calm, Big Al's booming laughter, Donna's gentle warmth, Tucker's earnest young hope, Walter Hayes felt something shift inside him, something that had been frozen since Evelyn's death, slowly beginning to thaw. He didn't yet know that somewhere across town, a video of the evening filmed by one of the teenagers from the graduation party uploaded within the hour to social media with the caption, "This biker gang literally saved an old man's birthday and I'm sobbing," was already spreading faster than anyone at that long crowded table could have imagined, racking up thousands of views. Then tens of thousands comments flooding in from strangers moved to tears by what they were watching. He didn't yet know that within 24 hours that video would find its way to his daughter's phone through a coworker who didn't even know the elderly man in the footage was her boss's father. He didn't yet know that Emily would sit in her office chair stunned, recognizing her own father's face on a screen, watching complete strangers do for him what she herself had failed to do, and feel something inside her break wide open in a way that would change everything that came next. For now, Walter simply sat at his long table surrounded by his newfound family and allowed himself for the first time in 2 years to believe that maybe, just maybe, Evelyn hadn't been wrong after all. The video kept climbing while Walter blew out his candles, though nobody at that long table had any idea it existed yet. By the time the cake had been cut and passed around on paper plates, by the time Tucker had gone back for a third slice, and Big Al was deep into a story about a ride through Wyoming that involved a bear, a flat tire, and a diner owner who still owed him a favor, the video had already crossed 50,000 views. Comments were stacking up faster than anyone could read them. "This made me cry at my desk. My dad's been gone 6 years, and I'd give anything for somebody to do this for him when he was alive. Somebody tag this restaurant. The world needs to know who these bikers are. This is why you don't judge a book by its cover." None of that mattered yet to Walter. What mattered was the warmth of the room, the sound of Donna laughing so hard at Big Al's bear story that she nearly knocked over her water glass, the way Tucker kept glancing at him every few minutes, like he was checking to make sure the old man was still smiling. "You all right over there?" Ray asked, noticing Walter had gone quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. "Just thinking," Walter said, "about how strange it is. This morning I woke up dreading tonight. Thought it'd be the worst birthday I'd had since Evelyn passed." He shook his head slowly. "Instead, it might be turning into one of the best." "Funny how that works sometimes," Ray said. "Worst days and best days aren't always as far apart as we think." Across town, in a small apartment, with a television murmuring in the background, and a suitcase still half-packed by the door from a canceled trip, Emily Hayes Cooper sat curled on her couch, scrolling through her phone, still shaken from the conversation with her father, still turning over the guilt in her stomach like a stone she couldn't put down. A message notification popped up from her coworker, Priya. "Priya girl, have you seen this video going around? Some old man's birthday and a biker gang shows up. I'm sobbing." Emily almost scrolled past it. She wasn't in the mood for viral videos tonight, not with the ache in her chest still fresh from hearing her father's voice crack over the phone, not with the image of him sitting alone at that long table haunting her thoughts. But something made her tap the link anyway. The video loaded slowly, buffering for a moment before the footage sharpened into focus, and Emily felt her entire body go still. There he was, her father, sitting at the head of a long table, motorcycles visible through the restaurant window behind him, surrounded by leather-clad strangers who were in this exact frame of the video, singing happy birthday, loud enough that the phone's microphone distorted slightly with the volume. Emily's hand flew to her mouth. She watched the whole thing, all 43 seconds of it, her father closing his eyes to make a wish, the candlelight flickering against his face, the genuine, unguarded joy in his expression, as he opened his eyes and looked around at the strangers who had chosen without hesitation to make sure he wasn't alone. She watched it again, then a third time. By the fourth viewing, tears were streaming down her face, and not the polite, restrained tears she usually allowed herself in professional settings. These were the raw, ugly kind, the kind that came from somewhere deep and shameful, because the man in that video wasn't being celebrated by his daughter. He was being celebrated by people who had known him for less than 2 hours. Her phone buzzed again, a text from Daniel this time. "Daniel, have you seen this? Dad's all over social media. Some video of the bikers. Emily, I'm watching it right now. I can't stop crying. Daniel, same. I feel like the worst son alive. Emily, I feel like the worst daughter alive. Daniel, we need to talk, not tonight. Dad's still there celebrating, and I don't want to interrupt that. But tomorrow, we need to figure out what we're actually doing here, because this can't keep happening." Emily agreed. "Call you first thing." Emily set her phone down and sat in the quiet of her apartment, the weight of the video pressing down on her chest like something physical. She thought about the last 2 years, about all the birthdays and holidays she'd missed, with reasons that had felt airtight in the moment: work deadlines, a big presentation, a trip she couldn't reschedule. Reasons that had seemed completely reasonable each time she gave them. But sitting there watching her father's face light up because strangers had shown him more consideration than his own children had, those reasons suddenly felt paper thin, embarrassingly small against the reality of what they'd cost him. She thought about her mother. Evelyn Hayes had never missed a single important moment in Emily's life. Not one school play, not one soccer game, not one late-night phone call. When Emily was struggling through her 20s, trying to figure out her career, her relationships, her place in the world, her mother had shown up every single time, no matter how inconvenient, no matter how tired she was from her own long day. Family always comes back to the table. Emily had heard her mother say that phrase so many times growing up that it had become background noise, the kind of thing parents said that you nodded along to without really absorbing. But now, watching her father surrounded by strangers who understood that lesson better than his own children, did the words hit her with a force that nearly knocked the breath out of her. She picked up her phone again and typed a message to her father, deleted it, typed another one, deleted that too. Nothing felt adequate. No combination of words could undo the hurt of tonight, could erase the image of her father sitting alone at that table before the bikers arrived, an image she now couldn't stop picturing, even though she hadn't been there to see it herself. Finally, she typed something simple. "Emily, Dad, I saw the video. I can't stop crying. I'm so sorry I wasn't there, and I'm so grateful those people showed up for you when I couldn't. I love you so much. We need to talk soon, and I mean really talk about a lot of things." She hit send before she could second-guess it further, that sat staring at the screen, waiting for the 3 dots that would indicate her father was typing back. Back at Miller's Steakhouse, Walter's phone buzzed against the table, and he glanced down, his breath catching slightly when he saw Emily's name. "Everything all right?" Ray asked, noticing the shift in Walter's expression. Walter read the message twice before answering, his throat tight. "She saw the video," he said quietly. "Someone must have filmed all this and put it online." "Filmed us?" Big Al said, sounding more amused than concerned. "Guess we're famous now." "She's crying," Walter said, still staring at his phone. "Says she's grateful you all showed up for me when she couldn't." Ray studied Walter's face carefully. "How do you feel about that?" Walter considered the question for a long moment. "Complicated," he admitted. "Part of me is glad she's finally seeing what's been happening. Part of me wishes it hadn't taken strangers on the internet to make her understand it." "That's fair," Ray said. "Both those feelings can be true at the same time." Walter typed back a short reply. "I love you too, sweetheart." "We'll talk soon," and set his phone face down on the table, not quite ready to fall back into the swirl of guilt and apology that seemed to be building on the other end of that conversation. Tonight, at least for a little while longer, he wanted to stay present in the warmth of the table in front of him. But the warmth was about to be tested. The restaurant door swung open again, and this time it wasn't another biker arriving to join the celebration. It was a man in his mid-40s dressed in a rumpled business suit that looked like it had been slept in, tie loosened, hair disheveled, moving through the restaurant with the frantic energy of someone who had driven faster than he should have to get somewhere. Daniel Hayes scanned the room, his eyes landing on the long table crowded with leather vests and patches, and for a moment his expression flickered with something that looked uncomfortably like fear before he spotted his father sitting in the middle of it all. "Dad," Daniel called out, his voice carrying across the restaurant, drawing curious glances from nearby tables. Walter turned startled. Daniel, I thought you had a work emergency. Daniel crossed the room quickly, weaving between tables, his eyes darting nervously toward the bikers surrounding his father before settling back on Walter's face. I do. I mean, I handled it mostly. But then Emily called freaking out about some video, and I couldn't just sit at my desk knowing you were here, surrounded by... He stopped himself, glancing again at Big Al, at Ray, at the collection of leather and tattoos and patches that clearly still made him uneasy despite everything Walter had told him on the phone. The table had gone quiet, everyone watching the newcomer with varying degrees of curiosity and mild amusement. Walter said, standing slowly, "These are my friends, Ray, Big Al, Donna Tucker, and about 15 other people whose names I'm still learning. Everyone, this is my son, Daniel." Daniel gave an awkward, tight nod toward the table, clearly unsure how to navigate the situation he'd walked into. "Nice to meet you all," he said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced it was nice at all. Big Al leaned back in his chair, studying Daniel with an expression that wasn't unkind, but wasn't exactly welcoming either. "So you're the son," he said, "the one with the work emergency." Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's right. Must have been some emergency," Big Al continued, his tone even, "to keep you from your own daddy's birthday. And yet here you are now, showing up the second you hear of videos going around." Al Ray said quietly, a note of warning in his voice. But Big Al wasn't finished. "I'm just saying, funny how quick a man can find the time to show up once he realizes the world's watching." Daniel's face flushed red, embarrassment and defensiveness warring across his features. "With respect," he said, his voice tight, "you don't know anything about my situation. You don't know what my week has looked like, what's going on at my beach, the pressure I'm under." "Don't need to know all that," Big Al interrupted, his voice still calm but carrying an unmistakable edge now. "All I need to know is your daddy sat alone at a table built for 8 people tonight on his birthday 2 years running since he lost his wife. That's the only fact that matters to me." "Al," Walter said gently, placing a hand on the big man's shoulder. "That's enough. Daniel's here now. That matters." Big Al glanced at Walter, then back at Daniel, and after a moment his shoulders relaxed slightly, though the sharpness in his eyes didn't fully fade. "All right," he said, "for your daddy's sake. But I'll say this once and then I'll let it go. A man doesn't get unlimited chances to make up for the ones he missed. Eventually, the missed chances start outnumbering the ones still coming." Daniel opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. Something in Big Al's words landing harder than he wanted to admit. He looked at his father instead, his expression shifting from defensiveness to something more vulnerable. "Dad, can we talk somewhere a little quieter?" Walter nodded, and the two of them moved toward a corner near the restaurant's entrance, away from the noise of the celebration. Though Ray's eyes tracked them the entire way, some protective instinct keeping him alert, even as he tried to give the father and son their privacy. "Dad, I'm sorry," Daniel said once they were alone, his earlier defensiveness crumbling into something raw. "I really am. The work thing was real. I wasn't lying about that, but Emily's right. I should have found a way to be here anyway. I should have called the client back and said family comes first tonight. I didn't even consider it as an option, and that's on me." "I know it's hard, son," Walter said. "Work has its own pressures. I understand that better than you might think, all those years on the railroad." "That's the thing, though, Dad," Daniel said, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "You never missed our stuff. Not once that I can remember. Whatever pressure you were under at work, you always found a way to be at my games, at my school events, at every single birthday. I don't know how you did that, but you did. And I can't even manage to show up for one dinner a year." Walter studied his son's face, seeing genuine anguish there. Not the performative guilt of someone caught out, but something deeper and more troubled. "Daniel," he said carefully, "is this really just about work, or is there something else going on?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his eyes drifting toward the window, toward the parking lot full of motorcycles gleaming under the streetlights. "Since Mom died," he finally said, his voice thick, "coming here sitting at that table is seeing you sitting where you two always sat together. It's hard, Dad. It's really hard. Every time I walk into this restaurant, I see her. I hear her laugh in my head. And I know that's selfish because you have to live with that every single day, and I only have to face it once a year, but I think some part of me started avoiding it because I didn't know how to sit in that grief." Walter felt something in his chest loosen slightly. understanding beginning to replace some of the hurt he'd been carrying. "Why didn't you tell me that?" he asked softly. "I would have understood, son. Grief doesn't come with a rule book. There's no shame in struggling with it." "I didn't want you to think I didn't miss you," Daniel said. "I didn't want you to think the reason I was staying away was because I didn't love you enough to push through the hard feelings." "I never thought that," Walter said. "I thought you were just busy. I thought maybe you'd forgotten how much these things mattered." "I never forgot," Daniel said, his voice breaking slightly. "I think about Mom every single day, Dad. And I think about you alone in that house, and it kills me that I haven't been better about showing up. Seeing that video tonight, seeing you surrounded by people who aren't even family, doing what I should have been doing all along." He shook his head, unable to finish the sentence. Walter reached out and pulled his son into a hug, something they hadn't done in longer than either of them could easily remember. And for a moment, the two men simply stood there, the noise of the celebration continuing behind them, unaware or politely ignoring the emotional reunion happening near the entrance. "I love you, son, Walter said. "Grief is hard. I understand that more than anyone, but we have to find a way to carry it together, not apart. Your mother would have wanted that." "I know," Daniel said, pulling back, wiping quickly at his eyes. "I know she would have. I promise you, Dad, starting now, things are going to be different. I'm going to show up. Really show up, not just when I feel guilty enough to." "I'd like that," Walter said, echoing the same words he'd said on the phone earlier, though this time they carried more weight, spoken face to face with real tears still fresh on his son's cheeks. They returned to the table together, and Big Al, watching them approach, offered Daniel a small nod that carried a different energy than before, not quite an apology, but an acknowledgement, a recalibration of judgment based on what he could see in both men's faces. "Pull up a chair, son," Big Al said, gesturing to an empty seat beside Walter. "Any boy of Walter's is welcome at this table." Daniel hesitated only briefly before sitting down, and within 20 minutes, to Walter's quiet amazement, his son was laughing along with Big Al's stories, asking Tucker questions about his motorcycle, gradually shedding the nervous unease he'd walked in with. It was during this unexpected warmth, this fragile new peace settling over the table, that Ray's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, and something in his expression shifted, a slight furrow forming between his brows. "Everything all right?" Donna asked, noticing. "Not sure yet," Ray said, standing and stepping away from the table to take the call privately. Walter watched him go, a small knot of worry forming in his stomach without quite knowing why. Ray returned a few minutes later, his expression carefully neutral, though something in the set of his shoulders suggested he was working to keep it that way. "Everything okay?" Walter asked. "That was the club president," Ray said, sitting back down. "Word's spreading fast about tonight. Local news wants to do a story. Says the video's already got 500,000 views and climbing." The table erupted into a mixture of surprise, laughter, and disbelief. "500,000, Tucker said, nearly choking on his drink. "Are you serious?" "Serious as a heart attack," Ray confirmed. "News station wants to interview Walter tomorrow if he's willing. Says they want to talk to some of us too." Walter felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought of cameras interviews. Strangers wanting to hear his private grief turned into a public story. "I don't know about that," he said slowly. "I'm not sure I want the whole world knowing my business." "You don't have to do anything you don't want to," Ray said firmly. "This was never about attention. It was about making sure you weren't alone tonight. Whatever happens with the video, that doesn't change. But," Big Al added, a thoughtful look crossing his weathered face, "you might want to think about it anyway, Walter. Not for yourself. For everybody else out there going through the same thing you were going through tonight. Lonely folks, forgotten folks. Maybe your story reminds people to check on their parents, their grandparents, before it gets to be too late." Walter considered this, the weight of it settling differently than his initial anxiety had. He thought about all the other birthdays he might have spent alone if Ray hadn't happened to be sitting at that bar, about how many other people right now in restaurants and homes across the country might be experiencing exactly what he had experienced tonight before Ray intervened. "Maybe," Walter said slowly, "maybe you're right." Daniel, who had been quiet during this exchange, looked at his father with a new expression, something like admiration mixed with lingering guilt. "Dad, if you do this interview, I want to be there. I want people to know that, yes, his family messed up, but we're trying to fix it. I don't want to hide from what happened tonight. I think owning up to it publicly might actually help other families see themselves in this too." Walter studied his son, surprised by this resolve. "You're sure that means admitting on camera that you didn't show up?" "I'm sure," Daniel said. "If it helps even one other family avoid what almost happened to us, it's worth the embarrassment." The conversation shifted again, the earlier tension dissolving into planning, into cautious optimism about what tomorrow might bring, though underneath the surface, Walter couldn't shake a small, persistent unease. Something told him this story wasn't finished unfolding yet. His suspicion proved correct less than an hour later when his phone buzzed again, this time with a call rather than a text. He glanced at the screen and felt his stomach drop slightly. It was Emily, calling, not texting. "Excuse me," he said to the table, stepping away to answer. "Dad," Emily said the moment he picked up, her voice tight with an emotion he couldn't immediately place. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to not be upset with me until you hear the whole thing." Walter's chest tightened. "What is it, sweetheart?" "I booked a flight," Emily said. "The first one I could get, even with the storm delays. I land at 6 in the morning. I'm coming home, Dad, not just for a visit. I've been thinking about this for months, actually, long before tonight, but seeing that video finally pushed me to make the decision I should have made a long time ago." "Emily, what are you talking about?" "I'm moving back," Emily said, her voice cracking slightly on the words. "Not to Seattle, home. Near you. I've already started looking into transferring within my company, and if that doesn't work out, I'll find something else. I should have done this after Mom died, Dad. I should have been closer to you instead of 3 states away, telling myself a phone call once a week was enough." Walter stood frozen near the restaurant's entrance, stunned into silence by the announcement, his mind struggling to process the magnitude of what his daughter was telling him. "Emily, that's a huge decision. Your career, your life out there. My life should be wherever my family needs me," Emily said firmly. "And clearly, Dad, my family needs me here. I've spent 2 years building a life 3 states away while you sat alone at birthday dinners, and I let myself believe a weekly phone call made up for that distance. It doesn't. Watching that video tonight made that painfully clear." Walter felt tears gathering again, this time entirely different from the grief that had characterized so much of his evening. "Sweetheart, I don't want you making a decision this big just out of guilt." "It's not just guilt," Emily said. "Or maybe it started as guilt, but sitting here thinking about it, I realized something else. I miss you, Dad. I miss us. I miss the family we used to be before Mom died, and I think somewhere along the way I convinced myself that staying away made the grief easier to manage, when really it just meant I was grieving alone, missing both of you instead of just one." The two of them talked for several more minutes, Emily outlining her plans with the same determined efficiency she brought to everything in her professional life, and Walter found himself, despite his lingering disbelief, allowing hope to take root somewhere in his chest, hope that had felt impossible just hours earlier when he'd been staring at 7 empty chairs. When he finally returned to the table, his face must have betrayed the whirlwind of emotion he was experiencing, because Ray immediately stood and guided him back to his seat with a steadying hand. "What happened?" Ray asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Emily's moving back," Walter said, still sounding slightly stunned by his own words. "She's flying in tomorrow morning, says she's done living 3 states away." The table erupted into cheers and applause. Big Al slapping the table hard enough to rattle the glasses. Donna wiping happy tears from her eyes. Tucker letting out a whoop that drew amused glances from the surrounding tables. Daniel looked at his father with wide eyes. "She's really doing it, moving back for good." "That's what she says," Walter confirmed, still processing it himself. "Guess that video did more good than any of us expected," Big Al said, grinning widely. Ray watched Walter carefully, noting the mixture of joy and lingering disbelief on the old man's face, the particular exhaustion of someone who had experienced more emotional whiplash in one evening than most people experienced in a month. "You doing all right?" Ray asked quietly, leaning close enough that only Walter could hear him. "I don't know what I am feeling anymore," Walter admitted. "Tonight I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. Now it feels like I might be getting it all back, plus more than I ever expected." He looked around the table at the gathered bikers, at his son sitting comfortably among them now, at the phone in his hand still warm from Emily's call. "It's a lot, Ray. It's a lot to take in all at once." "Good kind of a lot, though," Ray said. "Not every day a man gets to watch his whole world reshape itself for the better." "No," Walter agreed, a genuine smile finally breaking through the exhaustion. "I suppose it isn't." But even as the celebration continued around him, Even as Daniel pulled out his own phone to show Tucker photos of his son Tommy, even as Big Al launched into another story that had half the table laughing uncontrollably, Walter noticed his own phone had lit up once more, this time with a notification he hadn't expected. A message from an unknown number, the area code unfamiliar, the words on the screen making his stomach twist with sudden unexplained dread. Mr. Hayes, my name is Sandra Whitfield. I'm a producer with a national morning show. We saw the video of your birthday and would love to feature your story along with your family on our program next week. Please call me at your earliest convenience. This could be a wonderful opportunity, though I should mention there are some questions we'd like to ask about your late wife's estate and any inheritance disputes within the family. As our research team found some public records that might add context to tonight's story. Walter read the message twice, his celebratory mood curdling into something colder, more uncertain. There were no inheritance disputes. There had never been any inheritance disputes, at least none that Walter knew about. Walter read the message a third time, hoping the words might rearrange themselves into something less alarming, but they stayed exactly as they were, that phrase, inheritance disputes within the family, sitting in his stomach like a stone dropped into still water. Walter, Ray's voice cut through the fog of his thoughts. You went pale all of a sudden. What's wrong? Walter turned his phone around so Ray could read the message himself, watching the biker's expression shift from confusion to a hard-focused alertness as he absorbed the words. Who's Sandra Whitfield? Ray asked. Never heard of her, Walter said. Says she's a producer. Wants to talk about inheritance disputes. He shook his head slowly. Ray, there's no dispute. Evelyn's estate was simple. Everything split evenly between Emily and Daniel. The house comes to me until I pass, then it goes to both of them too. We had a lawyer draw it up years ago, plain and straightforward. You sure about that? Ray asked carefully. No changes since then, no surprises. None that I know of, Walter said, though a small, uncomfortable seed of doubt had already begun to sprout in his chest. Daniel, who had been listening from across the table, leaned forward with a frown. Dad, let me see that message. Walter passed him the phone, and Daniel's face tightened as he read it, his earlier warmth from moments before evaporating into something more guarded. This is strange, Daniel said slowly. Public records wouldn't show inheritance disputes unless somebody filed something. A will contest, a probate dispute, something like that. He looked up at his father. Dad, has anyone approached you about the will recently? Any lawyers, any paperwork you don't remember signing? Walter's mind raced backwards, sifting through the recent months for anything that might explain this. And then slowly a memory surfaced, one he hadn't thought much of at the time. There was something, he said hesitantly. About 4 months ago, a man came to the house, said he was a financial advisor, said he specialized in helping seniors protect their assets from, I don't remember exactly how he phrased it, family exploitation maybe. He left some papers, asked me to consider updating my estate plan for my own protection. Did you sign anything? Daniel asked, his voice tightening with urgency. No, Walter said. I told him I already had a lawyer, that Evelyn and I had handled all that years ago. He left his card. I threw it away, I think. Didn't think much more about it. Do you remember his name? Ray asked. Walter closed his eyes, straining to recall the details of that brief, forgettable encounter. Something Whitfield, he said slowly, his eyes snapping open with sudden alarm. I think his last name was Whitfield. The table had gone quiet, everyone sensing the shift in mood, the celebration momentarily suspended by this new unsettling thread. Whitfield, Big Al repeated, his brow furrowing. Same last name as the producer who texted you. Could be a coincidence, Donna offered, though her tone suggested she didn't believe it. Could be, Ray said, but coincidences like that make me nervous. Daniel was already pulling out his own phone, typing rapidly. I'm going to look into this, he said. If somebody's trying to manufacture some kind of inheritance story around Dad, especially now that this video's gone viral, that's not journalism, that's exploitation. Exploitation of what exactly? Walter asked, still trying to piece together what any of this meant. Ray leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful and increasingly troubled. Walter, when a story like yours goes viral, sometimes it attracts more than just good attention. Sometimes it attracts people looking to make a quick profit off of it. Fake charities asking for donations in your name. Scammers pretending to represent news outlets. People trying to stir up family drama because drama gets more views than a simple happy ending. You think this Sandra Whitfield is trying to scam me? Walter asked, disbelief coloring his voice. I think, Ray said carefully, that we should find out exactly who she is before you call her back. Daniel looked up from his phone. His expression had darkened considerably. Dad, I found something. There's a company called Whitfield Financial Solutions, based 2 counties over. They've got complaints filed against them with the state attorney general's office, elder financial exploitation, multiple cases where they convinced elderly clients to sign over power of attorney under the guise of asset protection, then use that authority to redirect assets before family members caught on. The color drained further from Walter's face. That's the same man who came to my house. And now somebody with the same last name is reaching out claiming to be a producer, asking about inheritance disputes that don't officially exist yet, Ray said grimly. Walter, I don't think this is a coincidence at all. I think somebody saw that video, recognized an opportunity, and is trying to manufacture a story that gives them leverage, or at minimum gives them a way to insert themselves back into your life under a different disguise. Walter felt his hands trembling, not from grief this time, but from a cold, creeping fear he hadn't anticipated when the evening began. What do they want from me? Could be a few things, Ray said. Could be they're hoping the attention makes you desperate enough to actually sign those papers now, thinking it'll protect you from public scrutiny. Could be they're planning to approach a real news outlet with a fabricated story about family conflict, try to extort you or your kids into paying to make it go away. People who prey on elderly folks get creative when they smell opportunity. Daniel's jaw was tight with fury. This is disgusting. Using Dad's birthday, using this whole beautiful night to try and manipulate him. We don't know for certain that's what's happening, Donna cautioned, but it's worth being careful. Walter sat very still, processing the sudden collision between the warmth of the evening and this cold, unsettling possibility. Just an hour earlier, he'd felt more loved and supported than he had in 2 years. Now he felt exposed, vulnerable, aware suddenly of how quickly good fortune could attract those looking to exploit it. What should I do, he asked, looking between Ray and Daniel, feeling for a moment very much like the frightened, uncertain man he'd been sitting alone at that table just hours before. Don't call her back, Ray said firmly. Not tonight, not until we know more. I can call our family lawyer first thing tomorrow, Daniel added. Have him review everything, make sure nothing's been tampered with, and figure out exactly who this Sandra Whitfield is and what she actually wants. I'll make some calls too, Ray said. I know some folks in law enforcement who deal with elder fraud cases. Might be able to get some answers faster than waiting on lawyers. Walter looked around at the faces surrounding him, his son newly recommitted to showing up. Ray, who'd shown up as a stranger and become something like family within a single evening. Big Al and Donna and Tucker, all of them now leaning forward with protective concern etched into their expressions. I don't know how to thank all of you, Walter said quietly. An hour ago, I thought the worst thing that could happen tonight already happened. Now you're all sitting here protecting me from something I didn't even know to be afraid of. That's what family does, Big Al said simply, whether it's blood or not. The rest of the evening carried a different texture, and after that, the earlier lightness tempered by a watchful vigilance, though the warmth never fully disappeared. Ray made several phone calls throughout the following hour, his voice low and serious as he spoke with the contacts Walter couldn't identify, gathering information piece by piece. By the time the restaurant began preparing to close for the night, Ray had assembled enough information to paint a clearer, more troubling picture. Turns out, Ray said, sitting back down at the table where Walter, Daniel, and a handful of the others remained, the crowd having thinned somewhat as the night grew later. Whitfield Financial Solutions has been under investigation for the better part of a year. Multiple families have filed complaints. Sandra Whitfield is the daughter of the man who visited your house, Walter. Family business, apparently. So it's connected, Daniel said grimly. Definitely connected, Ray confirmed. My contact says they specifically target elderly folks who've recently experienced some kind of public attention, viral moments, local news features, that kind of thing. Makes sense if you think about it cynically. Public attention means public scrutiny of finances too, which makes families more anxious about protecting assets more vulnerable to a smooth-talking advisor offering false security. Walter felt sick to his stomach. They were watching for something like tonight, waiting for a story like mine to blow up. Looks that way, Ray said. The message they sent you wasn't about a morning show at all. There's no evidence any legitimate news producer named Sandra Whitfield exists. It was a pretext, a way to get you on the phone, probably to guide the conversation toward reconsidering that estate paperwork under the guise of protecting your privacy or your family's reputation. That's despicable, Donna said, her earlier warmth replaced by genuine anger. Preying on a man in the middle of what should have been a beautiful moment. Daniel looked at his father with fierce protectiveness. Dad, I'm handling this first thing tomorrow. I'm calling our lawyer. I'm reporting this to the Attorney General's office, and I am not letting these people anywhere near you or your finances. I appreciate that, son, Walter said. Though exhaustion was beginning to creep into his voice, the emotional weight of the entire evening finally catching up to him. I think I'd like to just enjoy the rest of tonight, if that's all right. Deal with all this tomorrow with clearer heads. Of course, Ray said gently. Nothing more to be done about it tonight anyway. Just wanted you to know before you went home so you're not caught off guard if she calls again. Thank you, Walter said, and meant it, deeply aware that without this table of near strangers, he might have called that number back in a moment of confused vulnerability, might have found himself entangled in something far worse than a lonely birthday. As the evening wound down further, the crowd thinning to just Ray, Big Al, Donna, Tucker, Daniel, and Walter. The conversation gradually returned to gentler territory, though the earlier scare had left its mark on the room, a lingering awareness that the world outside this table wasn't always kind, that gratitude and vigilance sometimes had to exist side by side. Can I ask you something, Walter? Tucker said, breaking a comfortable lull in conversation. Now that all this is happening, the video going viral, your daughter moving back, your son here, do you think things are actually going to be different? Or do you worry it'll all fade back to how it was before? It was a question that seemed to catch Walter off guard with its directness, though he considered it seriously before answering. I think, he said slowly, that real change takes more than one dramatic night. Tonight was extraordinary, I won't pretend otherwise. But extraordinary nights don't rebuild what's been eroding for 2 years all by themselves. That takes consistency. Small, ordinary days showing up again and again long after the excitement of tonight fades. Daniel, listening closely, nodded slowly. He's right. I think that's exactly what I need to focus on. Not just today's guilt, but next month's follow-through. And the month after that. That's wisdom right there, Big Al said approvingly. Most people get caught up in the emotion of a big moment and forget that real love shows up in the boring, unremarkable Tuesdays too. Evelyn used to say something similar. Walter said, a fond, sad smile crossing his face. She said anyone could show up for the big moments. The real test was whether you showed up for the small ones too, the ones nobody else was watching. The mention of Evelyn brought a brief, comfortable silence to the table, everyone honoring the memory without needing to fill the space with words. It was Ray who finally spoke again, his tone shifting towards something more practical. Walter, before we call it a night, I want to ask you something. Would you be open to coming by the clubhouse sometime? Nothing formal, nothing you're obligated to do. Just some of the guys, we do community rides sometimes. Charity runs veteran support events, things like that. Given everything you told me tonight about your life, about wanting to matter to people, wanting purpose, I think you'd fit right in with what we do. Walter looked at Ray, surprised by the invitation. Feeling something warm bloom in his chest at the thought of being wanted, being included not out of pity, but out of genuine consideration. I'd like that very much, Walter said. Good, Ray said, satisfaction evident in his voice. We'll set something up. No pressure, no rush, just an open door. The night eventually reached its natural close, the restaurant staff beginning to stack chairs at nearby tables, the manager gently signaling that closing time approached. Walter stood feeling both physically exhausted and emotionally lighter than he had in longer than he could remember, the strange whirlwind of the evening finally beginning to settle into something he could actually process. Ray insisted on covering the entire bill, waving away Walter's protests with the same easy firmness that he'd shown at the beginning of the night. Birthday gift, Ray said simply. Ray, this is far too much. You can accept it, Ray said, meeting Walter's eyes steadily, because someday somebody else is going to need exactly what you needed tonight, and you're going to be the one who shows up for them. That's how this works. That's how it's always worked. Walter felt tears gathering again, though these carried none of the loneliness that had characterized his earlier tears that evening. I don't know how I'll ever repay this kindness. You already know how, Ray said. Pass it forward. That's the only payment any of us are looking for. As the group began gathering their things, preparing to head their separate ways into the night, Walter's phone buzzed once more. He glanced down, half expecting another concerning message from the mysterious Sandra Whitfield, but instead found a message from Emily sent from what appeared to be an airport departure lounge. "Emily, boarding now. I'll see you in the morning, Dad. I can't wait to hug you. I love you more than I've told you in a very long time, and I intend to make up for that starting tomorrow." Walter read the message twice, warmth spreading through his chest, chasing away the last remnants of the fear the Whitfield situation had stirred. "Everything all right?" Daniel asked, noticing his father's expression. "Everything's more than all right," Walter said, showing him the message. "Your sister's on her way." Daniel smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that Walter hadn't seen from his son in longer than he wanted to admit. "Guess tomorrow's going to be a big day, too." "Guess so," Walter agreed. They said their goodbyes outside the restaurant, the parking lot still lined with motorcycles gleaming under the streetlights. Big Al pulling Walter into a bear hug that lifted the old man briefly off his feet, Donna kissing his cheek and promising to call and check in on him, Tucker shaking his hand with an earnestness that suggested the young man meant every word of his earlier promise to consider Walter something like family. Ray was the last to say goodbye, standing beside his motorcycle, his helmet tucked under one arm. "Thank you," Walter said, simply unable to find bigger words adequate to the moment. "For everything, for sitting down when you didn't have to, for making that phone call, for tonight." "Thank you for letting me," Ray said. "Wasn't sure how you'd take a stranger inserting himself into your birthday." "Best thing that's happened to me in 2 years," Walter said honestly. Ray smiled, swinging his leg over his motorcycle, settling his helmet onto his head. "We'll be in touch about that clubhouse visit. And Walter..." He paused, meeting the old man's eyes one final time. "Whatever happens with this Whitfield business, you're not facing it alone. Not anymore. You've got a whole table of people now who care what happens to you." Walter watched as the motorcycles pulled out of the parking lot one by one. Engines rumbling into the night, the sound gradually fading into the distance until only silence remained. The same silence that had characterized his life for 2 long years. Except now it felt different somehow. Not empty, just quiet, the way a house feels quiet when the people who fill it with love are simply resting, not absent. Daniel drove him home that night, insisting despite Walter's protests that his own car could wait until morning that tonight. Of all nights, his father shouldn't be alone, even for the short drive back to the house he'd shared with Evelyn for over 4 decades. They talked the whole way, conversation flowing more easily between them than it had in years. Daniel asking questions about Ray and Big Al, and the club genuinely curious now. Rather than fearful, Walter sharing details about Evelyn's letter about the promise he'd been struggling to keep. "Dad," Daniel said as they pulled into the driveway, "I want you to know something. Whatever happens with this inheritance scam thing, whatever this Whitfield woman is trying to pull, I'm not going anywhere. Not this time. I know I've said that before and not followed through, but I mean it differently now. Tonight changed something in me." "I believe you, son," Walter said, and found that he genuinely did. Inside the house, after Daniel had left with the promise to call first thing about the lawyer, Walter sat alone in his living room for a while, the same quiet living room that had felt so oppressively empty every night for the past 2 years. Tonight, though, the quiet felt different, filled with the warm residue of everything that had happened. The memory of Big Al's laughter, Donna's kindness, Tucker's earnest promise, Ray's steady, unwavering presence. He pulled Evelyn's letter from his jacket pocket one more time, before bed, unfolding it carefully under the lamplight, reading the familiar words one final time that night. "Never spend another birthday believing you are alone, my love. Family always comes back to the table. Always. Trust that even when it's hard." Walter smiled softly, tears gathering but not falling, a strange peace settling over him that he hadn't expected to find on this particular birthday. "You were right, Evelyn," he whispered to the empty room. "You were right all along." He didn't yet know that Sandra Whitfield wasn't finished trying, that a formal letter would arrive within the week threatening legal action if Walter didn't agree to a meeting regarding what the letter vaguely termed significant discrepancies in the deceased Mrs. Hayes' original estate documentation. He didn't yet know that this threat, however baseless, would test the newfound unity of his family in ways the empty chairs at dinner never had. He didn't yet know that Ray's promised phone call to law enforcement contacts would uncover something even more troubling than simple fraud, a pattern connecting the Whitfields to at least 6 other elderly victims across 3 counties, several of whom had already lost significant portions of their savings before anyone intervened. But for tonight, Walter Hayes climbed the stairs to his bedroom, said a quiet goodnight to a photograph of Evelyn on his nightstand, and slept more peacefully than he had in 2 long years, wrapped in the warmth of a birthday that had begun in loneliness and ended in something that felt, for the first time in a very long time, remarkably close to hope. Emily's flight touched down just after 6 in the morning, and by 7 she was standing on Walter's front porch with 2 suitcases and eyes still swollen from crying somewhere over Nevada. Walter opened the door before she even knocked, some instinct pulling him downstairs the moment her car pulled into the driveway, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all. They just held each other the way they hadn't held each other in years, Emily's shoulders shaking against her father's chest, Walter's hand resting on the back of her head, the way he used to when she was small and scared of thunderstorms. "I'm here," Emily finally said, pulling back just enough to look at him. "I'm really here, Dad." "I see that," Walter said, his own voice unsteady. "Come inside, I'll make coffee." They sat at the kitchen table for hours that morning, the same table where Walter now ate most of his meals alone, and Emily asked question after question about the night before, about Ray, about the bikers, about the strange, threatening message from Sandra Whitfield that Daniel had already filled her in on during a phone call from the airport. "This makes me so angry," Emily said, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee mug. "Using your birthday, using this beautiful thing that happened to you to try and scam you. It's disgusting." "Daniel's already called our lawyer," Walter said. "Should hear something today or tomorrow." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Daniel arrived less than an hour later, looking considerably more rested than he had the night before, though the determination in his expression hadn't faded at all. "Lawyer called back," he announced, setting his phone on the table. "Says the estate paperwork is completely clean. No discrepancies, no irregularities, nothing for anyone to legitimately dispute. Whitfield's claims are baseless." "So it was a scam," Emily said. "A calculated one," Daniel confirmed. He also said he's already spoken with the Attorney General's office. Apparently they've been building a case against Whitfield Financial Solutions for months, and Dad's situation might actually help them close it. They want to interview him if he's willing. Walter set down his coffee mug slowly. "I don't know if I want to get any more tangled up in this." "You wouldn't be getting tangled up in anything, Dad," Daniel said gently. "You'd be helping stop people who've already hurt other elderly folks the same way they tried to hurt you. My lawyer says at least 5 other families have come forward since word started spreading." Walter considered this, thinking about the anonymous strangers who had shown him such extraordinary kindness the night before, thinking about Big Al's words about family being something you built as much as something you were born into. "All right," he said finally, "I'll talk to them." Ray called later that afternoon, his voice carrying a warmth that had become quickly familiar, despite having known the man for less than 24 hours. "Heard the news about your lawyer. Good news all around." "Thanks to you," Walter said. "If you hadn't sat down at my table last night, you'd have figured it out eventually," Ray said. "Good people usually do. I just happened to be there when it counted." "Ray." Walter said, something in his chest tightening with gratitude he still hadn't fully found words for. "I meant what I said last night. I'd like to come by the clubhouse, whenever's convenient." "How about this weekend?" Ray offered. "We're doing a charity ride for the local veterans old home. Could always use an extra set of hands, even if it's just helping organize donations." "I'd like that very much," Walter said. The weeks that followed unfolded with a rhythm Walter hadn't experienced in longer than he could remember. Emily found a position with a company 2 towns over within 3 weeks, moving into a small apartment close enough that she visited nearly every Sunday, sometimes bringing takeout, sometimes cooking in Walter's kitchen, the way her mother used to, filling the house with smells that made the old man's chest ache with a bittersweet mixture of grief and gratitude. Daniel kept his promise, too, showing up not just for birthdays and holidays, but for ordinary Tuesday dinners, bringing Tommy along most weekends, the teenager gradually warming to his grandfather in a way that surprised everyone, especially after Walter started telling him stories about the railroad, about meeting Evelyn at that county fair, about the small, unglamorous moments that had built a 45-year marriage, brick by patient brick. The legal situation with Whitfield Financial Solutions resolved faster than anyone expected. Walter's interview with the Attorney General's investigators, combined with testimony from 5 other affected families, provided enough evidence to file formal charges within 2 months. Sandra Whitfield and her father were both arrested, their operation shut down entirely, and Walter received a call from the lead investigator, thanking him personally for his willingness to come forward. "You helped protect people who couldn't protect themselves," the investigator told him. "That matters more than you know." Walter found himself thinking of Evelyn often during those months, wondering what she would have made of everything that had happened, certain in his heart that she would have approved of every twist and turn, especially the ones involving leather vests and motorcycle engines. The clubhouse visits became a regular part of Walter's life. What started as a single Saturday helping organize donations for the veterans' home turned into something much larger, something that gave shape and purpose to days that had previously stretched out, empty and directionless. Walter discovered he had a talent for working with his hands, that decades hadn't erased helping repair motorcycles alongside Big Al, who turned out to be an excellent teacher despite his intimidating size. Patient in a way that reminded Walter of his own father decades earlier. Tucker, true to his word, treated Walter like the grandfather he'd never had, seeking him out at every gathering, asking his opinion on everything from motorcycle maintenance to relationship troubles with a girlfriend Walter had never met but heard about extensively. "You're better at this than my own therapist," Tucker told him once, only half joking. "I've just lived longer," Walter said. "Makes it easier to see what actually matters and what doesn't." Donna became something like the sister Walter never had, calling to check on him regularly, dragging him along to community events, introducing him to her own extended family, until Walter found himself remarkably invited to gatherings that had nothing to do with the club at all, simply because Donna had decided he belonged in her life now. And Ray remained a constant, steady presence, the friendship between them deepening into something neither man had quite expected the night they met. They took to having coffee together every Wednesday morning, an unofficial tradition that started spontaneously and became sacred within weeks, both men finding in the other something they'd been missing without fully realizing it. Walter, a friend who understood the particular weight of losing someone essential. Ray, a mentor figure who filled some of the space left by his own father's death years earlier. "You know," Ray said during one of these Wednesday mornings several months after that first birthday dinner, "I think you gave me something that night too, not just the other way around." "How do you mean?" Walter asked. "I spent 30 years telling myself the rule was, don't interfere, everyone's got their own road," Ray said. "That rule kept me from getting hurt plenty of times, but it also kept me from really connecting with people outside the club. Watching you that night, watching what happened when I finally broke my own rule, reminded me that sometimes the roads are supposed to cross. Sometimes interfering is exactly the right thing to do." Walter smiled at this, thinking about how strange and wonderful it was that a moment of profound loneliness had transformed into something that enriched not just his own life, but the lives of everyone who'd gathered around that long table. 6 months after that fateful birthday, on a warm Saturday afternoon, Walter found himself standing in his kitchen, preparing for something he hadn't attempted in over 2 years, hosting a proper family dinner, cooked entirely by his own hands, using recipes Evelyn had left behind in a worn cookbook stained with decades of use. Emily arrived first, immediately taking over half the kitchen duties, despite Walter's protests insisting she remembered her mother's technique for the roast better than he did. Daniel arrived shortly after with Tommy, both of them carrying grocery bags full of ingredients Walter hadn't even asked for, determined to contribute something to the gathering. "You didn't have to bring all this," Walter said, eyeing the overflowing bags. "We wanted to," Daniel said simply. "That's kind of the whole point now, isn't it? Showing up with more than what's asked." Walter felt his throat tighten with emotion, watching his children move naturally through his kitchen, watching Tommy set the table without being asked, yet counting out plates for exactly the right number of guests. Because tonight the table wasn't set for 8 empty chairs hoping to be filled. Tonight, every single seat had a name attached to it, a person who had already confirmed they were coming, who wanted to be there, who understood without being told that showing up mattered more than any excuse ever could. Ray arrived just as the sun began to set, Big Al and Donna following close behind Tucker, trailing last with a store-bought pie he'd insisted on bringing, despite Walter's assurance that dessert was already handled. "Couldn't show up empty-handed," Tucker said, setting the pie proudly on the counter. "Learned that from you, actually." The dinner that followed was loud and warm and chaotic, in the best possible way. Laughter overlapping between Big Al's stories and Tommy's questions about motorcycles. Emily and Donna discovering an unexpected shared love of gardening, Daniel and Ray, discussing something about local charity work that had Daniel nodding along with genuine interest. Walter sat at the head of his own table, surrounded by faces both familiar and newly beloved, and felt something settle inside him that had been unsettled for 2 long, lonely years. When the meal wound down and the dishes were cleared, when the evening had softened into that comfortable, unhurried stretch where nobody was quite ready to leave yet, Walter stood and gently tapped his water glass, drawing everyone's attention. "I want to say something," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion building in his chest. "6 months ago, I sat alone at a restaurant table, convinced I'd been forgotten by everyone who mattered to me. I'd stopped believing my wife's promise that family always comes back to the table. I thought maybe she'd been wrong." He looked around the room, slowly meeting each pair of eyes in turn. "She wasn't wrong," Walter continued. "She just knew something I'd forgotten, that family isn't only the people connected to you by blood. Sometimes it's the people who choose to sit down beside you when everyone else has walked away. Sometimes it's the son who finally understands that showing up matters more than any excuse. Sometimes it's the daughter who rebuilds her whole life just to be closer to yours." Emily wiped at her eyes, reaching over to squeeze her father's hand. "And sometimes," Walter said, his gaze settling on Ray, "it's a stranger in a leather vest who refuses to let an old man believe he's alone." Ray nodded, his own eyes suspiciously bright in the lamplight. "I don't know what the next chapter of my life holds," Walter said. "None of us ever really know that. But I know this table right here tonight is exactly what my wife promised me I'd find, even when I stopped believing it myself. Family always comes back. It just doesn't always look the way you expect it to." He raised his glass, and one by one, everyone around the table raised theirs too. "To Evelyn," Walter said, "who was right about everything even when I doubted her. And to family, the kind you're born into and the kind you build in the beautiful, unexpected way they end up saving each other." Glasses clinked around the table, laughter and tears mixing freely in the warm evening light. And Walter Hayes, 74 years old, once the loneliest man in a restaurant full of strangers, sat surrounded by a family larger and richer than he ever could have imagined 6 months earlier. He thought about the letter still tucked safely in his nightstand drawer, the promise he'd finally truly kept. He thought about the empty chairs that had once represented his deepest fear, now replaced forever by faces that showed up not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And as the night deepened around his crowded, joyful table, Walter understood with complete and unshakable certainty that being forgotten by some people never means being forgotten by everyone, and that sometimes the family you find is the family that saves you now and for every birthday still to come.